down. We don't have such issues. So
Is
you have to
everyone
switch on
in?
your camera.
Audience in.
Zina, over to you.
I'm just checking if everyone is in. Okay, where is? Sorry, apologies.
I request everyone to please mute your mic.
Can I see your face? Okay, because he's the moderator.
Yeah, I'm
Can
here.
you? Okay. So let's start the day. Not today, but let's start the third panel with you. You're going to be moderating today driving innovation culture in your enterprise for success of digital transformation with amazing panelists, Ms. Asma Bajawa, Rodi Wong, Saba Abid, Aqib Sayed, and Uzma Arkad, right? If I'm not mistaken, with the spelling. I'll leave the floor to you. So you guys can start, and let's aim at a half an hour panel so we can have a bit of questions and finish on time. All right, the floor to you.
But I think I request if everyone can use the mic. Only the person who is talking should switch on the mic. Roddy, can you please switch off your mic? Uzma. Yes, thank you. Asim, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi everyone, this is Asim Rashid, the President and CEO of Creative Swan. I welcome all of you to this panel discussion number 3, which is about driving innovation culture in your enterprise for success of digital transformation. Now we have an amazing panel over here comprising of industry experts and great leaders, and I'll give a quick introduction. The first is Rodi Wong. Rodi is a global trainer, facilitator, and speaker on innovation, design thinking, and creativity. And Rodi has trained over 1,000 people across the globe. Then we have Asma Bajwa. She's the founder and managing director of People First HR Consultancy, which is based out in Dubai, and she serves Middle East, Africa, and the Pakistani markets. We have then Uzma Etakad. Uzma is organizational change and culture design consultant, and she runs Magna People Change Consulting in the UK, and she works internationally across the globe. The next is Aqib Sayed. Aqib is associated with marketing and communications for more than 15 years. He's general manager, growth and marketing, Multinet, and also country manager for in Pakistan for meetfrank.com. And finally, we have Saba Abid. Saba is the general manager for Airlift. Welcome, everyone. So just to give you a brief, quick context, and then, we will dive into the conversation with the experts over here. General Motors Company in 2016 acquired a startup in roughly $1 billion. And the startup's name was Cruise Automation, comprising of roughly 40 people, San Francisco-based, working on autonomous vehicle software. Now, General Motors acquired this company, and within 2 years, they grew it from 40 people to more than, like 1,000 people. And they said that this company, this startup, is going to develop the autonomous vehicle software for General Motors. And the question is why a company like General Motors, with 100 plus years of history, is acquiring a small startup and not setting up a division. Is it something which has got to do with the culture related with innovation and all that? Another takeaway with which I would leave you guys is a PwC study context, which says that 75% of change initiatives will fail, and all due to the lack of a digital culture. So in this context, we'll take a start. And do we have Rodi here right now? Okay. So Rodi, the first question is for you. And as I just mentioned about the GM example, and I talked about the PwC study with regards to change management challenges, from your perspective, your international experience, how do you see leadership, culture, tools, and behaviors help driving successful innovation? Yes, Rudy.
Yes. I think that when we want to drive successful innovation, there's basically 3 areas you want to address in your organization, meaning leadership and culture, tools and skills, and mindset and behavior. So I think these three should overlap, should be aligned in order to be successful in your innovation efforts in your organization. So meaning leadership and culture, you have to build a culture where it's allowed for people to experiment, to fail, to do new things, for example. Tools and skills, you want your workforce to have the right tools and skills, the right process to be able to innovate. And last but not least, also the individual mindset and behaviors of people in organizations is very important. Are they open? Are they curious? Are they prepared to fail, for example, themselves, to be able to experiment and to do new things?
Well, that's fantastic, Rudy. So coming to Asma, just adding on to that from a people's perspective and people's equation, how do we develop human capital to drive innovative culture that leads to successful digital transformation? I mean, what are the elements when it comes to the specific human capital side of the equation? Asma, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. I said that the first thing to say about developing human capital is that it's not a one-off start-stop activity. It's an ongoing, continual process that has to be embedded in the organization's culture, its budgets, the ways of working, so that we can really capitalize on people. And if an organization that's trying to drive digital transformation doesn't focus on developing people in that process, it won't actually achieve the degree of transformation that it's probably striving for. And obviously, ultimately affects costs and it affects the bottom line as well. So before we start to think of how to develop human capital, I think the first question to ask is what skills and competencies are needed in a digital era, and how are these different from where we are today? Quite often you see digital transformations being led through systems implementations, for example, where process efficiencies and reduction in numbers should come through, but we don't see that happening. And rather than re-engineering processes, what we actually see is systems being customized to current process. And that's often because it's led by the wrong people that perhaps don't know what the end state looks like and what it is they're trying to achieve. So I think although digital transformation are a huge learning opportunity for many people, it's really important that these are led at a departmental level by people that do have the skills and know-how. From an HR perspective, and we've got to move away from the traditional mindset that's often driven from a sometimes policing and compliance perspective, and move towards creating a culture that embraces new technologies, rewards people for thinking outside the box and challenging and changing the status quo. So human development is just like digital transformation. It's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop and start. It's continual. So when we think about this, helping people to see what that end state is going to look like, it's very much part and parcel of their own individual development. And then from there, you work backwards after you understand the final state of what are the skills, competencies, and the questions we should be asking ourselves are, what are people, will they be doing in the future? How have their roles changed? What new skills and competencies are required? Do we need more people, fewer people doing different things, or are there skills that we don't currently have in the organization that we need to acquire? So, from that perspective, it's really important to understand what skill set within the organization, what capability needs to be developed so that we can develop those. So if we start to think about those things, if we're talking about digital transformation, the most important thing about learning and development is to think of it from a more transformational perspective and think about approaches such as flipped learning, blended learning, virtual learning, approaches that are part and parcel of driving a digital transformation in the learning arena, so that we encourage HR professionals to think outside the box and not think that all learning happens in the so-called classroom. And by adopting digital platforms and tools, and there's plenty of them out there, this in itself will drive a change in behavior in the way that people learn, for example. So I think to end on one of the most, and we need to be kind of brief on this because of time, I think one of the most important things is that in any transformation, be it digital or otherwise, taking people on that journey with you, helping them to understand what the end state needs to look like, what kind of different opportunities that brings for them, is really part and parcel of the culture that needs to be enveloped, really.
That's fantastic, Asma. And I'm, just to make it engaged and interactive, I will try to capture if there is any interesting question that's coming up. So here is a question, and both Rodi or Asma, anyone can pick this question up. I will just read that out for you. So as business, process and digital optimization could potentially lead to employee reduction or job cuts. What are the critical factors, in your opinion, which should be applied and shown towards employees when integrating innovation and digital enhancement to business? So Rodi or Asma, anyone?
So can you just repeat the question? What are the critical?
Yeah, so as the business, process and digital optimization could potentially lead to employee reduction or job cuts. So what are the critical factors that you think should be applied towards employees when you integrate innovation and digital enhancement to business? What are the sensitive points which you should consider, given the fact that technology has a reputation for job elimination?
Well,
Rodi or Asma, anyone?
Shall I take that first, maybe, and then Rudy can come in on this? But, I think probably we don't see enough organizations that deliver the benefits that are presented in a business case of a system that's going to drive process efficiencies. Because quite often, as I mentioned in my kind of intro, that those, they should, or in the business case, it said this will deliver headcount reductions or deliver efficiencies. But actually, unless you kind of drive for that, you'll end up with having the same number of people probably doing the same things, but using a system to do things the way they do them now. So it's very important, actually, from a business perspective, to make sure and define what that change is going to look like. Obviously, in terms of handling people through that process, it doesn't necessarily mean that roles will be eliminated, but they may be different roles that they need to do. If we look at, I was going to talk about in my intro, but I cut it out obviously because of time. If we look at the aviation industry and the kind of challenges the changes that the digital transformation has delivered in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, where the whole customer experience has changed, online ticket sales, self-service check-in, online check-in, blah, blah, blah. The traditional role of a sales, or a customer service agent, actually in airports that have adopted that transformation, no longer exists. The type of person that you're looking for, the behaviors, the attributes, the attitudes they have is very different. So you're looking to hire and put a more of a hosting concept perhaps into that, just as an easy, simple example that we can all relate to. So obviously, if there are reductions in headcount, or there are changes in the roles that people will be performing, that needs to be taken into consideration. And this is why taking people on that journey, helping them to understand the benefit for them, the benefit for the customer, for the business, and what opportunities that might create for them in the future is part and parcel of.
Yes, Rudy. You want to add something, some European perspective, some global perspective?
I think it will be a global perspective. I think we're more alike than we maybe think. So, now to add to that, I think because of digital transformation, because of new technologies that emerge in companies, I think what will change in what people will need to do is, for example, the real human skills become more important. I think that resonates with what Asma just said. There will be new customer expectations due to new offerings from other companies, due to digital possibilities. So that means we have to make sure that we have the skills to empathize with our customers and clients more and more. So these real human skills that we have as a human will maybe become even more important in the future when we have more digital solutions, more technology, etc. So I think that's a bit of an addition to what Asma just said.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great point. And before moving to the next panelist, let me just add one thing to it, that if you understand every industrial revolution from the first to the fourth, every time the type of jobs that have been created are actually much more than the previous industrial revolution, but the nature of the jobs have been different. So as long as people are willing to unlearn and relearn, I think things are going to be fine. So next move to Uzma, right? Uzma is the organizational change and cultural design consultant, which is a very interesting area. I mean, a lot of pain points for people. So Uzma, how can we successfully drive change? A change is painful, right? Jack Welch used to say, oh, everybody wants change. Change is good. Change is great. But change is painful. So how to handle the challenges for successful digital transformation? Change, we don't like change. So how do we deal with change?
Great question. Thank you, Asim. First of all, thank you and the organizers of this event to invite me to share my thoughts. So thank you. So coming back to your question, yes, change is always uncomfortable for people because nobody wants to come out of their comfort zone. What I've seen, in my sort of 22 plus years of consulting life across the globe, that most of the time innovation projects, they focus a lot on technology implementation, on the delivery side of things, rather than focusing on basically the adoption of that solution, or on basically the people side of things, the change management. And that's where this whole specialism of organizational change management kicks in, which really, focuses on sort of enabling people or taking people on this journey of innovation or digital transformation, and enabling them in such a way that they kind of create desire in them to sort of embrace that solution, and not only desire but kind of preparing them for this new sort of challenge in their working life, or for adapting to new ways of working. So it's really involves a lot of engagement and communication with people, and sort of looking into their culture, like existing ways of doing things, and really understanding why people behave the way they behave. So it involves a lot of cultural assessments and understanding their existing cultural profile, where they're coming from, what are the attitudes, and what are the set of behaviors that may act as an enabler for innovation, or may actually hinder the process of innovation in any organization. So that's one thing in the whole process of change management, which is to do with people side of managing change. And the other area, which is I think almost forgotten, is around bringing that awareness to the leadership of any organization around how digitally mature they are, or their organization is. And when I use the word digital maturity or innovation maturity, what I mean by this is really to understand, like, do you understand the concept of digital strategy? Does your innovation strategy is kind of lined up with digital strategy? Is your leadership, supporting and sponsoring the whole process of innovation? Do you really know which areas in your business do you need to sort of innovate or bring technology in, and how it aligns with overall, business strategy? And what approach to innovation are you going to adopt? Is it going to be incremental approach? Is it going to be differentiated approach, or is it going to be, an abrupt approach? So it's a whole raft of things around, knowing your digital footprint, knowing how digitally mature you are. So these two forgotten areas of cultural fitness and managing people side of change, and sort of managing the digital and knowing the digital maturity side of things, that I basically include in my management of change approach. So it's a 4-stage structured approach that I sort of adopt across all innovation projects with my clients, and it's been successful in the UK. So these 4 stages, basically, number 1 is about knowing your existing footprint. So like I said, it's all about doing assessments around, your cultural footprint, your cultural profile, around your digital maturity profile, around change impact assessments, around operational readiness. So it's a lot of assessments that we carry out in this first phase. The second phase actually leads into mobilizing change. So it's all about sort of taking insights from all of these assessments into creating a change action plan, and sort of engaging and mobilizing the whole organization. So we have to build a change network agency within an organization, which involves, your leaders, your managers, your ground workers, and they all have their specific role in the process of change management. So we kind of engage with them on a regular basis. We do a lot of stakeholder management. We do a lot of targeted communication. And then, after we have a robust change action plan, we move to the third phase, which is about embedding that change. And it's all about, actually actioning those plans and sort of, harnessing the cultural change and in the workshops at the group level. So there's a lot of like group dynamics involved there, a lot of different tools we apply to harness and, reinforce the lasting cultural change. And then the fourth stage basically is about evaluating the success that we aspired in the beginning of any innovation project. So that is about benefits realization, tracking and monitoring of that. Of course, it takes time, but it's all about, setting the right sort of momentum going forward for sort of, reaping the benefits of any innovation project. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yes. Yes, you want to say something else as well?
So I was just saying, the biggest challenge, what I've seen and what is supported by the research, industry-led research, is around cultural barrier. So that's the biggest sort of, challenge that organizations face around driving a successful innovation in their organization. And that is so true. I've seen in my own experience that, it's just that people focus on sort of putting in place, fancy or a state-of-the-art technology, but they completely ignore people. So it is very, very important to take people along with you and just, harness the fit for rice, fit for purpose, innovation cultures and behaviors in the organization.
So that's fantastic. And I can see a question here, which is very, very relevant to the conversation that we just have had. So let me raise this question for you, Uzma. Mm-hmm. So how an organization identify the gaps in the capabilities of their human capital? And what should be the starting point for this sort of change? So how do they do the gap analysis and how do they take a start?
Yeah. So, like I said, so what we do, we've got this 4-staged sort of methodology to manage change in organization. In the first stage, basically, that's the exploratory stage. And that's where we ask a lot of questions. We run a lot of assessments. So if you take an example of culture, for example, so you will run, assessments around, okay, how do you basically behave? I mean, why do you behave the way you behave now? So basically, in my practice, I use cultural web as a tool. And that actually tells, around what practices you have in organization, what informal, formal sort of, practices and policies you have, what stories are being told to people, where are the controls and where does the power reside? And so there are different dimensions that basically we assess organization on. And it's a set of questionnaire that we run with people, with teams. And then we come to know about their core paradigm. I mean, what is their core belief that actually is manifesting into the behaviors that they do? And then, we sit with the leadership team and we discuss about the aspired sort of cultural attributes, behaviors, or, the set of behaviors that they want to see in their organization as a result of this innovation project. For example, creativity could be one thing that they want to harness, so then you kind of compare the aspired behavior versus the existing profile. And, what I do is that I map out the insights or findings from the cultural web assessment onto the cultural wheel, and we see where the gaps are. And those gaps actually then we address with leadership teams and team leaders, and we discuss with them, and then we agree on the desired set of behaviors. And it's a long process, and then you run surveys and workshops with teams, and that's how you basically have their agreement as well into the solution. So that's kind of co-created, and that's how you harness it then.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would just add one point here that when it comes to employee engagement, I think communication is somehow underrated. It is so important. I learned from an energy company that they were able to double their employee engagement result just by
Yeah.
focusing on communication. So communication is, I mean, it's never less. Do more and more of it. So let's move
No,
on.
yeah.
Yes, please. You want to say something?
No, I was saying I just can't agree more. I completely agree with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So let's move to our friend Akib here, right? He's listening to everything and smiling on some of the points. I can really see the smile over here. So Akib, let's try to explore what are the local technology barriers and how do we handle them for successful innovation. And what I would want you to say is, I mean, talk in terms of developing world perspective where we have challenges, right? Technology barriers and human capital challenges, regulations and governance, and all sorts of
Yeah.
challenges. So, from a developing world perspective, the local technology barriers, how to deal with them, so we can drive innovative cultures for successful digital transformation.
So I think thank you so much, first of all, for the opportunity to be here amongst such an amazing group of people, and discussing the transformation, which is a big subject during the COVID-19 times. So I think your question is very interesting to kind of look at it from a local perspective, but kind of matching up what we see globally, and where kind of people kind of struggle. So largely, if you look at innovation, the innovational barriers you can see in 4 or 5 different areas. It can be a technological barrier, it can be a technical barrier, it can be an organizational barrier, or it can also be in general, when you look around, it can be another leadership barriers as well. In Pakistan, in a very localized context, if you were to look at a couple of these things, so there are situations where we kind of see that there's a lag of most of the people that are in this industry. So I think the biggest barrier isn't really the acquisition of technology. I think it's the acquisition of skills. Being on so representing a marketplace for job seekers and for jobs, what we've seen that the world has really evolved in the recent times to kind of innovate in terms of new types of technology, to kind of go through the process of innovation during tough times. And what we've noticed is that while the situation kind of changes and you come across these barriers, one of the biggest barriers is the people handling the situation. And I feel that in a larger context, people do have the tools, do kind of understand the larger landscape, but I think the struggling part is finding that right talent to kind of do that, because automatically we've always been kind of tagged. Anyone who's talented might be looking out for a job. So we kind of turn around the tables and we say no, not really. So people who are talented can really transform the organization, as as Usma was saying, and as Asma pointed out, it requires a lot of effort around how do you find the right talent. And Rodi speaks about the fact that there are different ways to innovate in such a scenario. But I feel that the most important key that we all could come down to, although it's a tech summit, but we'll come down to the fact that it goes back to the people, and I think it's the skill that kind of is the struggling bit, I think, in the local landscape. In order to kind of come over them, of course there are kind of ways and methodologies, as Usma spoke about and Asma spoke about. These are all different ways to kind of approach the same problem. I come from comms and marketing and BD, so kind of our perspective is to all of these things is to kind of create opportunities, communicate to people the kind of skills that people would be looking for in the future. So for example, at Meet Frank, what we kind of do is to find that match for people, like people who might not be looking for jobs but are great skills, so that they can find what they're looking for. So that's one way to kind of contribute and kind of shorten down the method of getting companies the right talent to kind of overcome this barrier of the kind of talent that should actually eventually will change how the organization looks at innovation, for that matter.
That's great, Akib. And let me just add one more point here for you, that we were talking in terms of innovation context and culture context, but if I ask you to divide this question, the barrier part or the problem part, and how to mitigate them, deal with them, between pre-COVID and post-COVID world, then would there be a differentiator between the two?
Of course, I think the biggest differentiator between pre-COVID and post-COVID, as long as it comes down to culture, number one, the culture pre-COVID could have been felt, like, it could have been experienced. The culture was something that you can go in and get inspired by. But I think in post-COVID time, the biggest differentiator is that your cultural reflection digitally, number one, becomes much more important than how you used to take it. So, for example, in the pre-COVID time, you might not really care about lifestyle or cultural videos, or how your values and kind of employee benefits that you have, or the kind of environment that you have. I think post pre-COVID, I think this is the biggest area. It's how you communicate the culture, and how do you stay on platforms where you get the right talent and kind of create that opportunity, kind of fast track and kind of move into this phase where you need to kind of utilize the opportunity and create more and more cultural context and relevance for the future of work.
Okay, that's great. So we have a question here which is very relevant to the conversation that's going on. The question is, I need to know specific interventions to cultivate innovation culture. So I understand probably the question is about what are the specific interventions that should be planned, or the training sessions or the workout sessions that should be planned to build an innovation-oriented culture in a company. So Rudy, you take a start, and then anyone who would want to add something, please feel free to do that. Yes, Rudy.
Yeah, thank you. So if I understand the question correctly, then from my point of view, I think when you look at the conversation that's been going on, it's all about, well, a lot of it is about the human part of the whole transformation. And I think what I see in my practice is I'm quite an ambassador for design thinking, which is a great process for innovation, and it really focuses on the human part of any innovation. So what I think, if you want to train and skill people in your organization to make sure you can thrive innovation within your organization, I think one of the key things to do is to look at the skills that you need to make sure that you build this empathy, as I talked before. How do you manage to capture what humans, so your customers, really need, but also how can you capture what your employees really need, or what internally is needed, and that's one of the skills that I focus on in my trainings. As I said before, it's all about these really human skills that you probably will need to develop within your organization. And what I like to do is to use a process like design thinking to start doing an innovation project on a small scale. And while doing it, you're building these skills within people, but you're also working on an innovation culture. So I'm more or less the one who will promote, like, okay, let's start a very effective innovation process. Let's start a project, and on the way, develop the skills needed that people will have to use and that can make use of in a very what is disruptive world that we live in right now, also due to COVID, but also due to all kinds of technology that emerge all the time. So hopefully that was an answer to the question, and maybe some others in the panel can elaborate a little bit on this.
I think from my perspective, innovation is not a training intervention as such. I think it's about allowing space for people to think together and in isolation differently, and kind of, you have to create space to come away from your day job, if you like. You have to create forums where people could come together and start to think about, how can we improve this? How is this going to enhance our customers' experience, or the way that we work, or how can we deliver benefits to this? So I think it's about ensuring, and then also rewarding and putting policies and processes in place that if you're trying to develop an innovative culture where people come up with ideas and are prepared, then we've got to allow people to make mistakes. We've got to allow people to get things wrong. We've got to allow people to embrace that and take every mistake as a learning opportunity. For example, that didn't work, so let's try. So I think it's not about let's have an intervention to drive innovation. It's about the culture and the way that we work. And establishing those foundations and creating an environment where people feel that they can, even if you look at organizations that drive innovation, if you like, or the Googles of the world, they're working environments, the surroundings are very different. They're not restricted by, you've got to be at work at this time, and you bring your dog to work if it helps you, those kinds of things. So it's really about, I think, creating the space where people can really optimize their thinking in that way?
Just one thing I would like to add to what Asma and Rodi said, and I completely agree with them. It's just around, I think most of the organization, they take innovation as an additional thing to what they've been doing. So that thinking should go away. It's not an additional thing. Then it should become, it should become your way of doing things, a way of doing business, in real life. So it should become who you are, basically. And that boils down to actually harnessing that mindset, that digital first mindset, without taking any sort of fancy ERP platform, for example, as an additional thing. No, it's not a additional thing, number one. Number two, you have to sort of you have to start from somewhere, really. So you have to really identify the enablers and blocker behaviors in your existing cultural profile. So you have to really understand first who you are. What are the inhibiting, for example, behaviors that might hinder the whole innovation, aspiration that the business has. And then secondly, as a like collectively as a company, or maybe leadership and people also, they should agree on the right set of behaviors that they want to inculcate or they want to harness. So once you know your future state and you know your current state, the whole challenge is to bridge the gap. And that is done through, basically educating people about those behaviors, running the workshops with them, training them on the right set of behaviors, creating, the reinforcement systems in the form of like reward mechanisms in place, which will sort of encourage the right behaviors, or leadership model in place and the role modeling in place. So it's different sort of intervention that you sort of undertake to make sure that your right set of behaviors are sort of, embedded in organization. So it's like a lot of leadership support, a lot of engagement, a lot of like communication, a lot of role modeling, a lot of like reinforcement systems in place. So, you make the whole organization sort of ready to embrace that innovation in such a way that it becomes, part and parcel of your daily life.
One thing I'd like to add, sorry, 1 second, if I could just add something, and it's specific to Pakistan actually, because I picked this up from a study that I did back in the UK, and particularly in places like Pakistan where we are very hierarchical, seniority matters, all of those kinds of things. To really encourage people to challenge the status quo, you have to allow that to happen. It's not because I'm older and I've been here longer and therefore you've got to do as I say, because that then just stifles and doesn't allow innovation to really happen. So that's a really important aspect, I think, of bringing innovation and allowing that growth to happen in an organization.
Okay, I think we will need to conclude. Mr. Said, you're there?
Yes, I'm here. And Zaina, before we conclude, if I could just take one-liner from everyone, sure. One takeaway for the audience. So, Rudy, starting with you, if you have one line, quick takeaway for everyone from this conversation, what's that one line? Rudy.
For me, that would be that every innovation starts when there's enough urgency.
That's great. Yes, Asma?
I think it's a journey. It's an ongoing journey, and you have to take people with you on that journey.
Fantastic. Ozma?
I think we should keep in our mind always whenever we want to bring in innovation in our organization, that it's not that organizations who change, it's people who change. So we should not forget people. It's people really who change and not organizations. So if you really want to reap benefits out of any innovation, you will have to think about your people and their culture. That's my message.
Thank you. Yes, Akif.
So I feel I kind of agree with everybody. I will just say that speed in tough times. I think speed is the name of the game, and resilience. So I think people need to continue to innovate and stay resilient to kind of these changes, and I think we'll all come through.
Fantastic. And one word from my side, with permission from Zaina. Look, disruption is real. Either you disrupt or you get disrupted. right? Thank you very much for the panel members, and thank you very much for the
Thank you.
organization for having us.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. Again,
Thank you
sorry
so
for
much.
the delay, and have a very good day and a great week ahead.
Thank
Talk
you.
soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.